Hey everyone, Oldies DJ Matt back with you. Welcome to episode 7 of my one-off 8-part YouTube video series called An Introduction to Deep Diving into Rock and Roll Music of the 60s and 70s and some 80s. And in this episode, we have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about 7 great albums. I'm going to introduce you to a lost hit by a well-known vocal group from the 60s and 70s, originally associated with Motown. And I'm going to introduce you to one of the internet's foremost experts on albums. So before we get started, I've been showing you these LP albums and CD albums, all of these episodes, and there's a reason for that. I'm trying to encourage you to build a collection. Now, I'm targeting younger folks in this series, or anyone who needs help finding out more about the wide variety of rock and roll music from the 60s and 70s. But I am aware that younger folks are probably only collecting music in digital audio files, maybe not even whole albums, just individual songs. Or maybe some of you are using streaming services like Spotify or iHeartRadio or whatever, and looking at listening to playlists or specific so-called stations or individual songs on YouTube. I don't know. I'll tell you, there's nothing that beats building a collection. This is really the most fun way to become a fan of an artist. And back in the day, this was the only way the artists had to communicate with their fans. There was no social media. There wasn't even music television until the very early 80s. So these artists would spend a lot of time putting an album together, thinking about their fans. They love their fans, and they're like, what should we put together for them this time around? What can we do to bring new fans in? You know, then they'll think about artwork and liner notes and who performed on the record, and they'll pick out some songs that they don't expect to get played on the radio necessarily, but they want to put them together, these albums together with these variety of songs for their fans. So the whole thing about becoming a fan is much easier and much more fun when you collect the actual record. And yeah, the liner notes, there's a lot you can get from the liner notes. Get yourself a good magnifying glass for reading the CD liner notes. But just to give you an example, I showed you Linda Ronstadt's album earlier in this series. Well, she covers songs written by quite a variety of songwriters. And if you hear one of her songs, you're like, who wrote this song? You can look up the songwriter. And if you haven't heard that person's name before, well, you can look that person up on Wikipedia. And then every now and you'll learn a lot about, for example, if you look at Linda Ronstadt's band, you'll see the name Andrew Gold as one of the guitarists. Does that name ring a bell? Yeah, Andrew Gold wrote and sang one of the iconic songs of the late 70s, Thank You for Being a Friend. So the whole thing about being an album collector is really a lot of fun. It's something I recommend. And that's why I'm showing you all these albums. So, with that in mind, let's get started. Our first album we're going to look at is the third album by the group Cream called Wheels of Fire, which came out in 1968. And this was originally a double LP. One LP contains new studio tracks, including the hit White Room, and the other LP contains live tracks, including the hit Crossroads. So at this point, Cream is starting to do a few more interesting things besides their usual guitar-based, loud rock and roll bluesy tunes. There's plenty of that on this album too, but like Ginger Baker's songwriting has improved, and we're hearing some interesting songs like Passing the Time, or there's one acoustic number that Jack Bruce is performing with cello and maybe a viola on that one. I'm not sure. Using Asian chord changes and I think quarter tones. There's a lot going on this record. A little bit A little bit more variety than on the group's previous two albums. The another thing that you'll notice about this album right away is that it sounds so much better than the first two. Somebody finally figured out how to produce the group Cream, how to properly mic Ginger Baker's drum set, so that in White Room you can hear the complexities of his fabulous drumming on that song. Eric's guitar never sounded better. The sound also on the live portions of the record also much better than the previous studio albums. The live LP, by the way, only has 4 songs on it, focusing on the individual talents of the group members. Crossroads is the shortest song. So, in short, Cream Wheels of Fire, maybe their best album. There's a lot going on here. But their first two albums are also quite good. Now, unfortunately, they did put out an album after this one called Goodbye. That album has all the appearances of a contractual obligation, I'm sorry to say. It's been reported that by the time Wheels of Fire actually came out, Cream had already decided that they were going to call it quits and were finishing off their current performing obligations as well as recording the Goodbye album and not seeming to have their heart into it. So, 1968, Cream, Wheels of Fire. Great album. Oh, this next one is a real favorite among fans of early 70s album rock. It is the reunion album for the group Traffic called John Barleycorn Must Die. It's got only 6 songs on it. This came out in 1971, and it is a very loose, informal, kind of jazzy record where the songs are, except for one of them, the songs are all built around Steve Winwood's piano. At this point, Traffic is a trio, and Steve Winwood overdubs guitar and I guess bass where necessary. But one of the things that adds to the jazziness and beauty of this album is that drummer Jim Capaldi also overdubs additional percussion on the tracks. And so this album is a little more cool and atmospheric than albums of the typical 1970 guitar, bass, drum, or progressive rock sound of the time. It's quite an enjoyable recording. Now, Chris Wood, the sax and flute player in Traffic, he is not trying to play a jazz sax and flute or the traditional rock and roll sax. He's doing his own thing. He's being inventive. So on the opening track, Glad, he's doing his own kind of rock and roll saxophone with a wah-wah pedal. And in the follow-up song, Freedom Rider, he's got this cool sax riff and a beautiful flute in the instrumental passages of that song. There's only one really well-known song on this album, which is Empty Pages. That was released as a single. It did not do well as a single, but I remember the stations in New York were playing it. But if you know that song, you have an idea what John Barleycorn Must Die sounds like. It is quite a unique and enjoyable listening experience from 1971. Okay, next we have something you don't hear about very often. I think an overlooked studio album by the Grateful Dead. This is called The Grateful Dead from the Mars Hotel. This came out in 1974. So in the mid-70s, the band did some experimenting, and not all of the songs they recorded on album during this period would become concert material. The only major concert favorites coming out of this album are the U.S. Blues, Scarlet Begonias, and Ship of Fools, and that's really about it. You have some jazzy experimentation with the song Unbroken Chain, an outright country song with pedal steel guitar and everything called Pride of Cucamonga. Both of these songs are co-written and sung by Phil Lesh. That's very unusual. The band sounds a little quieter during this period. For just a few years, they're down to one drummer instead of the usual two. And the only keyboard player in the band at this point is pianist Keith Godshaw. And that's actually pretty good at times because he's trading improvisational licks with Jerry Garcia on songs like the U.S. Blues. But this quieter song didn't last with the group for very long, and in 1979 they brought in Brent Midland as the new keyboard player and the third part harmony backup vocalist, and they developed a much louder sound with the Hammond organ and everything, and really led themselves into their peak concert popularity in the 80s. But during this period, the band sounds really good. They're doing 4.5 minute long songs, stretching the boundaries a little bit, but basically showing what they're capable of in the studio, and the result is really good. By the way, if you're thinking about Grateful Dead studio albums, the two that you're probably most familiar with are the ones that came out in 1970 back to back. Essentially, they were Working Man by American Beauty. Those two albums are different than Mars Hotel. On those particular albums, they were celebrating the acoustic folk roots of modern day rock and roll, blues, and country. And they pretty much stopped doing that after American Beauty, and their future albums sounded like what the band was doing in concert, only shorter songs. So that's what Mars Hotel is, a little more experimental, Grateful Dead from 1974. Okay, next, we have one of the most beautiful voices and stylish singers ever to come out of England, Dusty Springfield. This is her 1969 album called Dusty in Memphis. And this particular album also has a different cover. I think this is the less common cover. And nowadays, if you get the CD, you get some bonus tracks. So why Dusty went all the way to Memphis was because she was broadening her horizons as a singer, and she was a fan of the R&B sound coming out of the Atlantic Records company, Aretha Franklin in particular. So she made arrangements to record an album with Atlantic Records, with some of the same people who work on Aretha Franklin's records. And the result was really cool. Very soulful at times. The big hit off of this album was Son of a Preacher Man. Also, Windmills of Your Mind, Breakfast in Bed, I think was another hit single. So I would especially recommend looking for the newer versions of the CD with bonus tracks, because one of the songs included as a bonus track is the song Heidi Ho, or it's written as That Old Sweet Roll, Heidi Ho. That's another Carole King, Jerry Goffin song. Did not make the Dusty in Memphis album. I think it was a non-LP single and flip side. Anyway, it's available as a bonus track. So Dusty in Memphis, 1969. Wonderful record. Okay, next we have the Talking Heads and their 1979 album Remain in Light. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Talking Heads. In the 70s, kind of choppy guitar sound, nervous vocals, Psycho Killer. And then in the 80s, more of a streamlined keyboard sound. Not as nervous vocals, and the Psycho Killer only wants to burn down the house. Great band. But they did not make a regular linear progression from their 70s sound to their 80s sound. They took a very unusual detour in 1979 and put out this album, which doesn't actually fit the rest of their career. The explanation that I've heard is that it was a pet project between David Byrne and the album's producer, Brian Eno. They incorporated a lot of ethnic influences. They added 5 extra performers in the studio for most of the songs. And So you end up with songs with a lot of rhythm and a lot of extra instruments and a lot of extra background vocals and sometimes a lot happening at once. And it's a very enjoyable, a little unusual recording for the group. And toward the end of side two, it kind of slows down a little bit. It gets a bit spacey. Um, the well known song from this album is same as it ever was, "Once in a Lifetime," which kind of gives you an idea about the richness and depth of the individual songs. But that's about all I can tell you about Remain in Light. Okay, and to finish up our albums, we're going to take a look at a couple live concert recordings. And I should point out, I've introduced you to a lot of live albums, but live albums aren't always that great. It seems to be a rite of passage for most performers to do a live album at some point. Um, it's not always anything special, but the ones I've shown you, including these two, definitely have something going for them. We're going to start with the 1973 album by Deep Purple called Made in Japan. And this was recorded in Japan, where the group was very popular. Now, a little background, Deep Purple was around since the mid-late 60s. You might have heard the song Hush, which was a hit for them in 1968, I think. And it was a different band back then. The driving force behind Deep Purple, though, from the very beginning, was the guitar of Ritchie Blackmore trading off against the amped up, fuzzed out Hammond organ of John Lord's and the great drumming. And these three musicians definitely developed a sound, but at the end of the decade, they wanted to change their sound a bit. So they recruited a new singer and a new bass player, and the result was what they call Deep Purple Mark II. And Made in Japan covers all of the music that, all of the albums that they put out from 1970 through 1972. Fireball, In Rock, and Machine Head, plus a couple non-LP singles. The This particular period was, some say it was the part of the peak period for Deep Purple. The In concert, they definitely amp things up a bit for their fans. The song Space Truckin' runs about 19 minutes in length. You're going to have a long drum solo. You're going to have some amazing bass playing. The song Smoke on the Water was finally made a hit as a result of this album. That song actually came out a year earlier. The live version on this album was the intended hit single, but most radio stations played the studio version from Machine Head instead. Anyway, from what I understand, the Made in Japan album includes all of the music that was in their main set, their 90-minute set for their Japanese tour. They just shortened it to a CD by cutting out the audience noise between songs. So if you see an LP version of it and the songs look like they're longer, they're actually not. They just trimmed out the audience portion in order to get everything to fit on a CD. But you can get a bonus version of the CD, which is what this is, that also includes the encore. It's not worth it, though. But anyway, Deep Purple, Made in Japan, 1973. That is early 70s hard rock at its very best. Wow, there's no other band that puts a loud guitar up against a Hammond organ the way Deep Purple did. Okay, and then our last album for this series, another live album, is Neil Young and Crazy Horse, and the 1979 album called Live Rust. This came out, I think, about 6 months after the album Rust Never Sleeps. Very successful album for them. 4 songs from Rust Never Sleeps are on Live Rust, including Powderfinger, Look Out Mama, There's a Big Boat Coming Up the River, that song, and Hey Hey My Into the Black. The Crazy Horse is actually a band in its own right. They are not specific to Neil Young, but whenever Neil Young wants to do a hard-driving, loud rock and roll album, Most of the time, he brings in Crazy Horse to work with him. The Live Rust album, as it originally came out, a double LP, side one and one song from side two are acoustic solo songs, and the rest of the songs on the album feature Crazy Horse with Neil Young and all of their amps turned up to 11. So this is a good career retrospective, mainly focusing on the material that Neil Young did with Crazy Horse, but not entirely. So you have Crazy Horse favorites like Cinnamon Girl, Like a Hurricane, and you also have songs like Sugar Mountain, Comes a Time, I Am a Child. This is basically a good career retrospective of an amazing performer and at his peak. So Neil Young and Crazy Horse, 1979, Live Rust. Okay. So moving on to our lost hit for this week, Gladys Knight and the Pips. Strange story, they left Motown Records in 1973 and released two singles. The first single is the song called Where Peaceful Waters Flow, which is the lost hit from this episode. It only got to number 29 on the charts. On their next single, a song that you might have heard of, The Midnight Train to Georgia, turned out to be their biggest hit. But you're going to love Where Peaceful Waters Flow. It is a beautiful ballad like many of the Gladys Knight and the Pips songs. It starts off with her singing quietly, and by the end of the song she's building up to a big gospel-like conclusion. And I love the Pips as a backup vocal group. They incorporate some of the old doo-wop sounds into their backup singing, like on Midnight Train to Georgia. Woo woo! So Gladys Knight and the Pips, Where Peaceful Waters Flow. That is the lost hit for this particular episode. Love that song. Okay, and we're going to finish up this episode with an introduction to one of the internet's foremost experts on albums. My good buddy from San Francisco, semi-retired DJ Stereo Steve. Steve spent quite a long time on broadcast radio in San Francisco and also as a club DJ. Eventually, the radio station changed hands. He spent some time on internet radio. These days, he's semi-retired, but doing a series of videos, 2, maybe 3 a month. And his YouTube channel is called Stereo 999. Steve is an expert on rock and roll music of all decades, plus jazz, and some blues and some international music and even lounge music. And he has a massive record collection. So what he does in his videos is he shows albums. Most of the albums he will show you probably haven't heard of. You may not have, I don't even think in most cases you'll have heard of the act that he is showing you, but it's all very educational. And you look at these episodes after a while and you learn things. You learn about connections between unknown albums and unknown acts and performers that you are aware of, groups that you're aware of, or songs that you're aware of. And every now and then he does talk about an act that you know or an album that you know. But it's a very educational experience if you want to dig deeper. I'm not as much interested in the newer music, but I do pay close attention when he's talking about the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Here's some albums I found out as a result of Stereo Steve. Johnny Rivers, Slim Slow Slider. Johnny Rivers had a hit with the song Rockin' Pneumonia and Boogie Woogie Flu in 1972. I sort of lost track of what he was doing until Slow Dancing, Swaying to the Music, many years later. But what he was doing is he put together a little band and recorded an album of great songs, including some great covers, Into the Mystic, the Van Morrison song, Rainy Night in Georgia. Great album. Here's one I really didn't know about. Bill Nelson's Red Noise and the album Sound on Sound. Bill Nelson was a member of the group Bebop Deluxe, which was influential in changing from the 70s sound to the 80s sound. That group broke up. Bill Nelson recorded one album with the group Red Noise, and that's Sound on Sound. It's a very uplifting, almost peppy pop album, almost. And you might know the name Lee Michaels. Do you know what I mean? This is his first album. This sounds nothing at all like You Know What I Mean or Can I Get a Witness. Lee Michaels shifted into more of a keyboard centric sound after this first album, but this first album is very guitar heavy, very psychedelic, and the album, by the way, is called Carnival of Life. So, by all means, check out my buddy Stereo Steve at the YouTube channel Stereo 999. You're going to learn a lot about albums from him. Okay, and that wraps up episode 7 of this series. There's one more episode left. The next episode, we're going to talk about some special topics. I'm going to give you a little teaser. We're going to look at an album by Donna Summer and Frank Zappa in the same episode and wrap up this series. So, until then, peace, love, and rock and roll.